Basil Comitis is living embodiment of the 4-hour work week, and a great example as to how a book, a podcast or a conversation can change your life. This is one of my favourites. I hope you enjoy our podcast with Basil Comitis. Well, welcome Basil to the Influencers and Innovators podcast. What intrigues me about your story is that you've really imbibed a philosophy that's transformed your business and lifestyle in really recent years. But I'm sure there's a backstory before we get there, Basil. Perhaps you can fill us in a little bit. Where do you come from and what's led you to be here at Fluid Solar House today?
Right, so when you say where I come from, where has the business started?
Where did you grow up?
What's my background?
Yeah.
Right, so I was born in a little country in Africa called Mozambique.
Right.
A little city called Beira. At the time it was a Portuguese colony.
Yep.
My parents...
Sounds very exotic.
So it is exotic. So I left there when I was 1, so I don't have a lot of experience from the place.
Yeah.
But my understanding is, so at the time it was a Portuguese colony.
Right. This is before independence?
This is a year before independence. So a year after I was born, the country gained its independence, at which stage my parents, 4 kids, 3 older sisters and myself, migrated to South Africa.
So this sounds like there's an interesting backstory even to that. So your parents are in Mozambique. Where are they from?
So my parents were born in Africa. Half of my grandparents were born in Africa, but our background was Greek.
Right.
And it was quite a strong heritage, and we kind of kept it.
Yeah.
So I sort of consider myself Greek,
yeah.
Australian, or from South Africa.
Yeah.
Even though
via South Africa.
Correct. Even though I'm 4th generation Greek, and it's quite common with a lot of the European sort of cultures that they keep that culture. They sort of adapt a new culture,
yeah.
But they kind of keep that culture in terms of where they came from.
Well, it's interesting that you've adapted the Australian and you've wrapped your arms around that and kind of foregone the Mozambique, South African legacy just a little bit there and arched all the way back to the Greek.
So for me, it sort of depends on sort of the how strong each particular sort of culture is.
Yeah.
So for me, Australia's home.
Yeah.
But Greece is where my heritage is, and a lot of our traditions and our cultures.
Yeah.
So I want to sort of embrace what it feels like to be an Aussie, but I don't want to forget the wonderful things that make my family.
That ancestral legacy, perhaps.
Yeah.
So, mum and dad, Greek heritage from Africa, have migrated to Mozambique. What were they doing in the Portuguese colony in the 1970s?
So I don't know the exact background, but I'd imagine it would have been very similar to a lot of Greek. So their parents, during the war or during a time in Greece that there were struggles.
Yeah.
They looked for better elsewhere, really.
Yeah.
So same way a lot of Italians, Portuguese, Greeks migrated to Australia years ago.
Yeah.
A lot of European migrants migrated away from Europe to Africa.
Yeah. And so, what did they leave Mozambique? Was that because of the political upheaval?
So independence basically meant that. So in layman's terms, if you were white,
yeah,
then wasn't really home. There wasn't really an opportunity for you.
You weren't as welcome.
You weren't as welcome, correct?
Yeah. So was it under threat of property acquisition?
So my dad had a jewelry business with his business partner and with his brother.
Yeah.
Quite a successful business.
Yeah.
And a lovely home, etc. And my understanding is he pretty much lost most of it.
So he's very middle class himself and has had to abandon that whole lifestyle in a moment.
Yeah, that's correct. And
wow.
then just so I don't think it was as dramatic as just grab 3 bags and see you later. I think they had 6 to 12 months to sort of plan.
Yeah.
Move some assets across, etc.
It's still a massive upheaval when you've planted your roots into it.
In terms of your business and
wow.
And your friends, it's basically starting fresh.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I think Dad was early 40s.
Yeah.
I think it was 40, 41 when he was
around your age now.
So 2 years ago, and I actually remember that turning 41, thinking, when my dad was this age, he basically started again from scratch.
Yeah, wow.
And it sort of gave me an appreciation I didn't have before.
Yeah, isn't it interesting when we get to certain crossroads in our lives and we reflect upon the achievements of the previous generations? and the perhaps achievements we didn't completely appreciate in our youth.
You don't appreciate what your parents offer you, do you, when you're young?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you may be too close to it. It's only upon reflection that.
That's probably true.
Yeah. So out of the frying pan and into the fire, perhaps moving from Mozambique to South Africa, it was an interesting time, I guess, more politically stable in the 1970s, and so that became home for your family.
Correct.
How was it like integrating? I mean, you were very young at the time, but how did mum and dad settle into?
So I think there was. So for me, it was easy because that's the home. That's the only place I knew. So I started school, and it was quite normal. They had lots of friends that migrated with them, so I sort of never heard a complaint of how hard it was. I think my sisters probably had a little bit harder. They were a bit much older than me. So my youngest of the three is 10 years older than me, and they could only speak Portuguese and Greek.
Wow.
And of course, South Africa was an English-speaking country.
Yeah.
So the stories that they have are less sort of favourable. I think their first 10, 15 years was a real struggle.
Yeah.
Whereas for me, South Africa was a lovely place to grow up.
Yeah.
And I've got sort of only had fond memories from when I was younger.
Yeah.
It didn't feel like a struggle. And sort of by the time I was old enough to remember, Dad had started his own jewellery business again and had found his foundations.
Yeah.
So that sort of first few years I missed out on because I was little.
So he stuck to his craft.
Correct.
And did he do that all the way through to retirement? Or?
That's right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So you kind of grew up under the counter at the store a little.
So for me, Dad always owned his own business, and I was always going to own my own business. And it wasn't necessarily that it was a jewellery business, but during school holidays, I'd get paid less than the rest of his staff. But it was kind of fun, and I'd serve a couple of clients. He taught me how to open, watches and replace batteries and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And even though I sort of when I first moved to Australia, even though I was sort of getting out of that industry, the experience was great.
Yeah.
Because a week into moving to Australia, I sort of walked into a local jewellery store and sort of found my first job.
Yeah.
And it's lovely to migrate to a different country and have work within a week.
Yeah. And
it wasn't for a long period of time, just a year, but it was it was thanks to sort of having that foundation from when I was younger.
So you were living through that political transition out of apartheid. You would have been late teens, early 20s at that stage?
So the first time that every both white and black person could vote was my first year eligible to vote.
Oh, really? Yeah.
So that was the year I turned 18.
So interesting times.
So fascinating times. Because and sort of very positive.
Yeah.
So everyone sort of was very positive about the future, etc.
Yeah.
But it was very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was very interesting.
Well, and so that led to after a period of time there. What kind of happened in that period, late teens into the early 20s?
So the next 3 or 4 years, I was studying marketing.
Yep.
During my studies, there was an opportunity to travel to Greece.
Yep.
And
had you been back to Greece before that?
So I had been 5 or 6 years prior with Mum.
Yep.
But this trip was the first time that I was going to travel alone.
Can I just ask for a moment? You're going to Greece, feeling Greek. Did you feel Greek in Greece?
No, so it's the opposite.
Right.
So you kind of feel like you don't have a home. So so in South Africa you were Greek.
Yeah.
And in Greece you were South African.
Yeah.
So you kind
and was
of
that
limbo.
confusing? Were you anticipating that dynamic when you first went to Greece, or did you? How?
So it was more disappointing than confusing.
Yeah.
It was kind of a bit sad, and as a young adult, you sort of question, do I belong?
Yeah. Where's my cultural fit now?
That's right.
Yeah.
And I've always been proud being Greek, and I arrive in Greek, and they look at me like a foreigner.
Yeah.
What's the story?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. You're expecting to be welcomed with open arms, like the prodigal child.
Correct.
And, yeah.
But it's interesting because then as you grow older, you sort of appreciate that you're not Greek or Australian or South African, but you're a nice blend, and that's a cool thing.
Yeah. So tell us more about your business journey.
Sure. Migrated to Australia, worked in jewellery for a year, so a great stepping stone. Some of the sales skills in that industry were very much aligned with other retailers at the time, Vodafone.
Yeah.
Started working for them.
Right.
In retail.
Yeah.
And was lucky that the sales skills in a retail level were transferable, and then got really lucky.
Yeah.
In terms of started in the business with not a lot of sales skills, natural people skills,
Yeah.
but didn't really understand selling, the sales process,
Did you have
etc.
any mentors or examples in sales, apart from perhaps your dad back behind the
So
counter?
there was a couple of people in the Australian jewellery business that one particular Asian lady, I think her name was Lulu.
Right.
And she was by far the best performer.
Yeah.
And she did a couple of really cheeky little things that became quite obvious to me quickly.
Right.
So for example, she would stand in the front of the jewellery store and she would constantly be cleaning these windows.
Right.
And I'm thinking the windows are pretty clean.
Yeah.
What's the story with this lady?
Yeah.
Because really she'd just be starting conversation with people outside of the jewellery store. So when she found an interested potential client,
Yeah.
the client would half have a relationship with her even before they've walked into the store.
Right. And you naturally understood the psychology behind that.
Correct. And then I started copying her.
Yeah.
And then so when I moved into selling mobile phones for Vodafone, then my first thing was I'd stand outside the store and spray the windows. And my colleagues would get frustrated with me because you're in a retail environment, people come to you to buy.
Yeah.
And it's slightly competitive, so who's going to sell more?
Yeah.
And I'd get the first sort of dib at a prospect because I'm standing in the front.
You're just taking it to the public, just that half a step closer.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then I got a little bit lucky in terms of I just had a couple of really amazing sales months, and a lot of it was just luck.
Yeah.
Like you can say, I talked them into buying stuff.
You were hustling, you were grinding, you can say all of that, but
there wasn't. I just had a handful of clients a week come up to me and say I won 3 or 4 of these.
Yeah.
When they weren't asking anyone else.
Yeah.
And I was labelled as a really good salesperson.
Yeah, right.
Without having the skill or the experience, I wasn't one yet.
So you were like the wonderkind of
Correct.
of Vodafone.
But most of it was luck.
Right.
But then,
why do you say most of it was luck?
because it was like I just had a lucky month and a half.
Okay.
But the timing was perfect.
Okay.
Because
so it just happened in a window that made you look like a superstar.
That's right. And then what happens is then you believe you're a superstar.
Yeah.
Because everyone's telling you, this kid's great.
Yeah.
And I suddenly went from being this average kid to the top performer in the state and the top 10 in the country.
So you started to believe the word out there about you, and that gave you some confidence and accelerated you to the next level.
Correct. So within a year, I was one of their best salespeople.
Yeah.
But that all started because I had a natural inclination to work with people and to help them buy stuff.
Yeah.
But none of it would have eventuated had I not just had those 7 or 8 extra clients come up to me randomly and without me even opening my mouth saying I want 5 of whatever you want to sell me. Yeah. So
you really leveraged from that luck, and
correct.
And in doing so, put yourself in a position of prominence within the business. And what was the next step from there?
So the next step, so I worked with them for another 4 years.
Yeah.
And then having that reputation, that skill of actually selling, always
Yeah.
sort of had me in a sort of high regard.
Yeah.
An opportunity came up sort of towards my 5th year of employment to actually open a Vodafone dealership.
Right.
And I sort of jumped at it because in my head,
That was the next natural step.
I was always going to work for myself.
Yeah.
There's a bit of me that struggles with corporate culture.
Yeah.
There's some people that do really well in a corporate environment and they know when to make a noise and when to shuffle in, and I just always struggled with that.
Yeah.
So when there's an opportunity to work for yourself, I just jumped at it.
Yep.
And really for the first sort of 5-10 years of our business, I just leveraged on my sales experience.
Yep.
And built a customer base, by building relationships because of how I knew how to sell.
Yep.
It was fun, we had a lot of success with it.
Yep.
But it was what we spoke about before, which was the grind.
Yep. And so you've started your own business. Let's go through the trajectory of that business a little bit, because I think it really talks to the heart of where you're at now and it was a real journey. So you had a big push for growth within your business, as most new businesses do, believing that growth equals profit.
Yes.
What was your experience with that?
So we were relatively my business partner at the time and I were relatively successful in building a strong sales team, both from a cultural perspective and a performance perspective.
Yeah.
Vodafone, our main partner, recognised that. So what companies, big networks are good at when they run well, is they know how to dangle carrots to continue to grow.
Yeah.
And in hindsight, that works really well for them, but not necessarily for yourself. So what they'll do is they'll dangle a carrot where if you exceed a sales result, you get a massive reward.
Yeah.
But then when you exceed the result, the next level of reward is much higher.
Yes.
And not achieving it means you get almost nothing.
And there's a penalty attached. Yes.
So you need to invest really heavily in sales, in people, in lead generation, in knocking on doors, etc.
Because they're looking at sales and you're looking at profitability, and those things don't necessarily match.
So they don't necessarily match, no. And if I was to change one thing about those years, I would have done a better job in managing that expectation with them.
Yeah.
And only running for the carrots that meant a win-win for both parties.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation in retrospect. So when you go from yourself and your business partner to what kind of numbers were you running in your business in terms of staff, and then talk us through the rate of diminishing returns that was attached to that.
So the biggest we got, and by no means a massive business, but the biggest we got was 15 staff.
Yeah, it's a pretty significant business. That's medium size.
It's a good sized little business. 2/3 of that was a sales team. 5 were admin. At the time we had a core group of salespeople that were amazing. And then we had a massive churn.
Right. So you had your 2 or 3 that were your stalwarts, and then you had the others that were coming and going.
Yeah, and that's because we were incentivized by our network partner to have a X amount of heads, because they saw that as, this is how you're going to get your result.
Yes. Yeah. So their KPI was how many heads were in the business, not necessarily, and how many sales were happening, but not necessarily.
The KPI on how to drive our business was how many heads we had in our business.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. And at what point did you acknowledge that that was not working for you?
So we probably acknowledged that halfway into it, but you're into this. You're on a treadmill and you can't get off it.
Yes. Yeah.
And then when the business financially isn't going quite as well as what you want it to go, turning it around isn't that easy either, because you've now got these big leases and so it might take you a year to put on 15 people, train them and get running, but it might take you 3 or 4 years to actually wind the thing down. Or just get it to a point where, because what you said earlier around running like crazy but not necessarily making a profit, is a really interesting thing to look at in hindsight. Because sometimes you look at, you feel like you're successful, and because you've been doing it for years, you justify it. But if you stop and look back at it, you go, well, I could have put in 1/5 of the effort and made double the money.
Is there a little bit of disillusionment that maybe sets in when you think, look, I'm doing all the right things and doing what my partner, in this case in Vodafone, is suggesting I do, I'm executing that, I'm selling heaps by myself, my business partner's pulling his end of the deal as well, we're doing all the right things, but why are we just always a bit behind the 8 ball? Why aren't the numbers adding up? And then it comes down to, well, why am I doing this at all?
So it took me a long time to come to the why am I doing this at all? Because naturally I'm a very not a positive person, but I like to look at the situation at what's the word I'm looking for?
Always look at the bright side of life, glass half full.
Correct, but in hindsight, that probably wasn't the best way of looking at it.
Yes.
So I would come in really excited about the opportunity, when if I was going to be really open and honest with myself, it wasn't such a great opportunity. So for years, I kept on pounding, and telling myself a story, an illusionary story of how this whole thing would end up.
Hunger for the more.
Correct. Whereas if I just stopped and been honest with where it was going,
Yeah.
I would have changed my path much sooner.
So tell me about your health and your lifestyle at this point. So you're never working harder, you've never had more staff. On paper, your business is as big as it's ever been. What's your health like? What's your relationship with your family at this point? How was life generally?
So my relationship with my family has always been solid.
Excellent.
So when I say solid, it's always, I've always been comfortable that I can go home and there's peace.
Yeah.
Relatively drama-free is how I describe it.
Brilliant.
Work is stressful.
Yeah.
For lack of a better word, just thinking about those years, my blood pressure goes up.
Yeah.
Health was okay.
Yeah.
But it was just a general level of unhappiness.
Yeah. Yeah. So can you determine a moment where it started where that realization came that this isn't right?
So not an exact moment, because I think there was an inkling, right?
There was always that feeling in the background that maybe...
For a while.
Yeah.
And if I was really honest with myself, I would have started questioning myself more around why are you feeling unhappy?
Yeah.
You've got your own business.
Yeah.
You've got,
you're living the dream.
Why are you so stressed all the time?
Yeah.
So I think it just evolved over time.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you've got to that point. You've made the determination something's got to change. How did you make those changes?
So there was a few things. So the first thing was our key partner, right? Who are a good partner to partner with, but their core philosophy and how they go to business, right? At the end of the day, means that that client belongs to them.
Yes. Yeah.
So you're not really a business owner; you're a glorified employee.
Yeah.
So the first thing was, how do I add some products, or how do I go to some of the clients that I've got a relationship with and start to sell or add value in other ways with products that belong to me.
So you broadened your portfolio of offerings.
Correct. So we started our own, and again it evolved. It didn't happen overnight, but we started our own cloud-based phone system business,
right?
Which we brand and we support, etc.
Yeah.
And again, that has its strengths, its weaknesses, its risks.
Yep.
But it had an ongoing revenue, like the revenue that came from a mobile network. Sorry, go.
Yeah. So you essentially become your own telecoms network.
Correct.
Yes. Right.
And that was just to balance out what I had learnt in terms of. Right now, I might have a relationship with a client, but they're not my client. It's not my revenue.
Yeah.
Whereas as soon as I now sell a product that is associated with my brand, it's my revenue. And if it's my revenue, I've got a little bit more control over it.
Yeah.
So we did that for a few years and built this other brand, and that was going on nicely. But then I looked at what the business looked like, and it wasn't any different.
Yeah. Yeah. So the portfolio of products had expanded, but the structure of the business
the stress and how we go to markets.
Yeah.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
And then an interesting thing happened. We started to look at our cost structure.
Yeah.
And we went, this is all great, but maybe we're just spending too much on rent, and maybe we're just spending too much on. But everyone's spending too much on rent. So how do I do it differently?
Yeah.
And then I can't remember which book I read it in. It might have been Tim Ferriss's book. He spoke about virtual assistants.
Yes. Yep. 4-hour work week.
So the concept of virtual assistants is having someone in another country that can do the work for you, similar work, at a fraction of the price. Yeah. And I thought to myself, well, if my cost structure is broken, then I'm not. How do I increase my revenue? That I've been trying to do that for the last 15 years, and it's not getting me anywhere. Yeah. Maybe it's about decreasing the cost to support my customers.
Yes.
So I took on my first virtual assistant through a partnership by one of my ex-business partners.
Yeah.
And worked out very quickly that this young lady was just phenomenal in terms of how much she cared about my business. Yeah. But also in terms of how well she looked after my customers.
Right.
So then the realization came that I can service these clients and grow this business without spending a fortune, because because the labour component
Yeah.
is much cheaper.
Yeah.
And then the whole idea is my Australian staff can help me manage these people
Yeah.
while I can then grow. Rather than having to put on 10 extra people, I can keep my team
Yeah.
and grow my business without adding that cost component.
So you had a staff of about 15 people at its height. At the time that you started making these changes, how many people are in your business?
About half of that.
About half of that, so we're down to about 6 or 7 people. And was it the admin roles first and foremost that you attacked there and transferred into
So there
hands
was
of...
2 key roles. So there was the admin role,
Yep.
and then there was the project management piece.
Yep.
And project management piece just means so if I'm selling something like a phone system, the
Yep.
delivery of it is quite complex.
Yeah,
And so I was then stuck with that complexity.
yeah,
And so I had become the bottleneck of my business. I was the only one that knew how to deliver.
so you could only take on as much work as you could handle, essentially, and didn't have any greater capacity than that.
Correct. So I'd gone from being the main salesperson bringing in all the sales to now being the person that's the only person that could deliver.
The technical assistance, essentially.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
And then worked out through my experience with my virtual assistants that they're very capable.
Yeah.
And they could take on 80-90% of a lot of those roles that I was running. And then
Right.
something happened which for me probably made the biggest difference.
Right.
I just thought to myself, what else can I do?
Okay.
Right. And
Pretty simple question.
Right.
It's those questions that can change your life.
and realized the answer was almost anything.
Right.
So now I question myself daily
Yeah.
in terms of what am I doing? Should I be doing it, or can someone else do it for me?
What a great takeaway.
And the answer is not necessarily just with virtual assistants. So just to fast forward to where the business is now,
Yeah.
is we now outsource everything.
Okay.
And
So you've gone from 15 to 7. You're at that point, you start to VA your business, and you go from 7 and a big lease space, an expensive lease space. You go from 7 to now
one,
1. You,
correct,
and in a shared office space,
correct.
something similar to the innovation grid. And how many VAs have you got? That's from your business?
So one tends to oversimplify it. So we've got a team of 15 to 20 with all of our outsourced partners.
Right. So we're talking from installation of a system through to how to get that
Technical
set up
support to level 2 support to cabling of a system, etc.
So you've now got more people as part of your business, but without the overheads and responsibilities, the wages and the like that's associated with that.
That's the perfect summary.
And skill set, collective skill set, higher or lower or same?
It's much higher. So
much higher.
Much higher, yeah.
Interesting.
So the guy that does the delivery on site is an IT engineer.
Right. So you're now getting specialists in each and every area, or you're training specialists in each and every area. How's your succession planning as a result? So a VA just pulls up stumps and said, I'm out of here. What happens in your business?
So I learned that lesson a couple of years ago when my key VA decided to migrate to a different country, to the US from Philippines. And so I had done a relatively good job in documenting what she did. Well, I'd done a good job in getting her to document what she did.
Yep.
Didn't quite have the structure I wanted.
Yep.
And that was the wake-up call. Luckily, I had 3 months with her.
Right.
So we trained another VA. That's now 3 VAs.
Yeah.
But now we document everything. When I say we, I don't, they do.
So you've really innovated your business to leverage the technology that you're already using with your VoIP phone network that you've created and branded. So these are things that just couldn't have happened in your business 10 years ago.
That's right.
But it's been the lessons learned over that 10 years that's enabled you to deploy this strategy in 2017, 2018 and beyond.
That's right. And then the sort of the newest opportunity that's sort of blossomed from all of this is I'm now able, and I've started helping some of my clients integrate virtual assistants into their businesses.
Yeah.
Because I've come to understand that a virtual assistant can buy a lot of breathing space.
Yeah.
So one of the main things I notice when I'm out with one of my clients is more often than not they're quite stressed.
Yeah.
And they're in that space that I was 7 or 8 years ago.
So you can identify that. You can see the symptoms a mile off.
Where they're probably waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning, with too much going on. There's not enough time, etc.
Yeah.
And I've come to realize that a lot of that can be alleviated just with time.
Yeah.
How do you buy time? You just get someone else to do the stuff that you used to do.
Yeah.
Just as well as you think you can do it.
How did the ego take all of this? Because there's something in the ego that says, I've got 15 employees, I've got this business, I've got that. For you, was there any of that holding you back?
So I think when we hit our worst years financially, when the business was struggling, the ego sort of goes out the window.
Yeah, fuck the ego now.
Yeah. And it becomes about survival, and then once you've survived, the challenge is just to keep a level of appreciation.
Yeah.
And to remember that how close you came to seeing your ass.
Yeah.
And the only reason why you're starting to be successful is because how close you came to seeing your, not because you're Superman or because, and that sort of keeps me grounded.
And it's interesting that you readily identified that in businesses that you walk into on a daily basis as well, and can automatically find ways to help them through that same struggle.
Well, it's very exciting. It's exciting to see someone that's, and it might be a completely different business in a completely different way, and potentially they could be making a small fortune.
Yeah.
But if they stressed 24/7,
yeah,
and they're not enjoying it and they don't have time,
yeah,
then how successful is the business?
So you've read the Tim Ferriss book, you've started to implement some of the strategies. What's the good stuff as a result? So you've got the VAs there. What kind of flexibility and lifestyle does this now lend you?
So not quite there yet, but starting to get there.
Tell me about some little experiments in walking away from your business that you've had recently.
So last year I did 2 little travel experiments, and it was only a month each.
Little mini retirements?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I went to Europe for a month.
Yeah.
And 2 months prior to that, went to South Africa for a month.
Yeah.
And just trialed. Not spending a fortune while I was living like a local.
Yeah.
Now where I could do it more often.
Yeah.
But also trialed working a little bit, just because I want to be in touch with the business.
Yeah.
Without sort of being in it 24/7. So I touch base with my project managers, my virtual assistants.
Yeah.
In the mornings, for an hour.
Okay, this is really interesting. So you're in the villa on the Greek islands. What does your day now look like when you're working remotely in your own business?
So it's so interesting because you imagine it to be a little bit different to how it is.
Okay.
So what I realized during my 2 trips is there's a little bit more work to do before I can start to travel 3 or 4 times a year.
Yeah.
And I'm not, and I'd like to travel at least 3 times next year.
Right.
To try and get to that stage.
Yeah.
So by the end of the second trip, I kind of felt like I'd lost touch a little bit.
Okay.
So 2 things that I noticed. The first was there's a lot of stuff that I thought I still had to do that my team was taking care of beautifully without me.
Wonderful.
And then I've worked out there's a couple things that I was relatively confident they could do that weren't quite there yet.
So it exposed some of the cracks within the model and helped you to refine.
Correct.
And iterate.
And if anything, that's probably good to sort of get away from your business for a little while, and because you can sort of be in that rut for 6 or 12 months,
yeah, and
not realize that those things need fixing.
How stimulating and energizing is the novelty of being in a different place?
It's just incredible. So I want to get to a stage, and I'm sort of half there, where my day looks like that.
Yeah.
So for one day I'll work from home. The next day I will try and, if I'm meeting a client somewhere, I'll work a few hours at a coffee shop and not go to the office at all. Mm-hmm. The next day I'll go to the office. So just that, I still value the routine of clocking in and clocking out.
Yeah.
But being able to do it at a slightly different time.
Yeah. From
a different location.
Yeah.
Just makes me feel a little bit more alive during the week, as opposed to Monday to Friday and then waiting for the weekend.
Yeah. Yeah. Would you have imagined that this was possible 5 years ago?
So if someone told me 3 years ago that I would be running a business completely virtually, and the business would be in my laptop, I could run it from anywhere in the world, and that I'd have 2 people in the Philippines and 1 in the US that would virtually run my business for me.
Yeah.
And that I'd have an additional income where I didn't have to sell 10 widgets just to survive, just to pay my loan off.
Yeah.
Where those 10 widgets would then be profits, I would have said go crazy.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it's been a really interesting journey over the last 5 or so years, but I guess that's all just working towards a beautiful crescendo that's built up from a journey that started so many years ago in Mozambique, that's led you not just here in Adelaide, but anywhere in the world whenever you want to be.
That's right. And to be honest, it's probably the first time for the last sort of year and a half, since we've gone completely virtual, which really happened about a year ago. It's really the first time where I'm starting to enjoy my business.
Yeah.
And it still has its stresses and its challenges.
Yeah.
But on the most part, I kind of wake up in the morning half looking forward to what the day brings.
Yeah.
Whereas for a good 14 or 15 years, I woke up really afraid of what the day would bring me.
Yeah, and now you seem to be this much more natural expression of yourself as well. I've known you for some time, and there would have been a time you would have been suited and booted, and here, and you almost look like you're on holidays now.
Yeah.
And this is just the way. This is your mindset.
It's semi-lazy thing, isn't it?
You're just living your work, not living for the work.
Yeah.
What a wonderful example.
Yeah.
This is a great example of somebody who has innovated and leveraged technology and applied it to their world, not just for the benefit of their business, but for their lifestyle and their relationships with their families. So thanks so much, Baz, for sharing your story with us, and I hope it's inspired many more of you at home to take on board some of the principles. Sometimes it is just a moment in life, or a book that we read, or a podcast that we listen to, that can make a massive change in the way that we think, and then of course the way that we live our lives. We hope today was one such podcast. I'm Dave Stockbridge from the Influencers and Innovators podcast. I'm bidding you a wonderful day.